I say this with no hyperbole. Batman Beyond had to be one of the most creative and original ideas to come from the creators of the same series that completely revitalized and recontextualized The Dark Knight. Batman Beyond was an incredibly innovative idea, showcasing a world post-Bruce Wayne in the cowl. If I could paraphrase from another Batman-related project, this show is indicative of the end is the beginning. Because Batman Beyond begins with the end of Batman, or at least the Batman that we've known. Years of crime fighting and life experience have taken a toll on Bruce Wayne's heart, leading him to resort to a low that he never thought he'd be capable of. In the heat of the moment, fearing for his life and the safety of a hostage victim, he uses a gun as a fear tactic. But in the end, it's himself that he scares, realizing that he's just used the same weapon that took the lives of his parents. Batman hangs up the cape and the cowl and resorts to life as a recluse, remaining a famous figure in his hometown, but no longer a familiar face, spending most of his days in self-appointed isolation. And 20 years later, by chance or by fate, depending on what you believe in, Terry McGinnis encounters the Jokers, and is both sabotaged and saved by an elderly Bruce Wayne. After all these years, he's still standing up for someone else, even when he can't literally stand up himself. Bruce holds his own in this fight, but is considerably weakened by the end of this encounter. Which makes sense, as at this point, this Bruce Wayne is about pushing 80. Terry brings an ill Wayne back into Wayne Manor, where he stumbles upon his greatest secret. That same night, Terry's father is killed by the very gang he and the former Batman fought off. Or so it would seem. The hit in actuality was orchestrated by the new head of Wayne Enterprises in order to stop Mr. McGinnis from blowing the whistle on Power's plan to spread biological weapons. Seeking justice, or more accurately vengeance, Terry takes the Batsuit and decides to chase down the criminals who took his family from him. Despite his initial anger at Terry for stealing the suit, Bruce becomes impressed by the young man and sympathizes with his story, recognizing a lot of himself in him. Origin aside, Wayne caves in and offers Terry a job, as well as an incognito career, teaming the two together to further the franchise and continue on Batman's legacy. A partnership is formed between the two generations of Batman, with Terry being the man to continue the myth, the next in line in the lineage of the legend, whereas Bruce guides Terry in his journey for justice, almost acting in the Oracle role, instructing him from afar. Though that's not to say Terry always listens to Bruce. He appreciates the guidance, but there's also plenty of times where his words fall on deaf ears. Sometimes he's just too headstrong for his own good, and at other times, he's proven to be just the right amount. Despite whatever limitations come with old age and a lifetime of injuries most couldn't even fathom, Bruce Wayne is still very much Batman, standing up for Terry on multiple occasions. There's even a point in time where Bruce busts out a back mech suit to come to the aid of his aide, proving that while you can take the man out of the Batman, you can't take the Batman out of the man, or something to that extent. A point which is very blatantly emphasized when Bruce is able to see through the manipulation of Shriek, acting as a voice in his head trying to drive him mad. But Bruce is able to determine the difference because that's not what he refers to himself as.
The voice kept calling me Bruce. That's not what I call myself.
What do you call yourself?
I am Batman!
Oh yeah, I suppose you would. But that's my name now.
I am Batman!
What makes Terry such a great Batman is that he's not Bruce Wayne's Batman. He's his own Batman. For better and at times worse. Terry's not a duplicate of the Dark Knight, but rather a whole different breed of Caped Crusader. Just minus the cape part. He's at a different age, he has a different attitude, and he's a different person. Granted, he's given things that the original Batman couldn't even begin to think of back in his day, having access to a veteran vigilante via Bluetooth, and a suit that protects him from danger, amplifies his strength, and gives him flight amongst other things. One thing that separates the two is the separation of man and mask. Bruce only had a social life when it was useful to his mission, using the guise of Bruce Wayne as a metaphorical mask when he was out of his literal one. In contrast, Terry very much has a life outside the Batcave. He's juggling justice with a job, getting good grades, and being a boyfriend, amongst other things. And speaking of which, his girlfriend Dana, I feel like her only place on the show was to complain about Terry not being around often. I don't think they ever got around to fleshing out her character or making her an actual character. She's just a constant annoyance. I could be incorrect because I'm going through this series with fresh eyes now, but all of my memories of her are just her wagging her finger at Terry. Regardless, Terry had plenty of responsibilities. And because of his age, he still had a lot of people to answer to in his day life. All the while in his night life, he was making others answer to him. Terry has people in his personal life that he has to look after, whereas his predecessor didn't even have a personal life to speak of.
Is there any time of day I get to have a social life?
Not in this business.
I think it's really telling that Bruce wound up all alone, with only a bat hound by his side. Which, by the way, is maybe one of the greatest additions to the series. It's amazing how easy it was to legitimize Ace, all by taking the bat mask off the dog. Who knew? Bruce prioritized his mission so much that he forgot the man on the mission. And in spite of all of his fortunes, he's ultimately left with nothing and no one. Just the memory of what once was. Alternatively, the same thing can't be said for his sidekick. Barbara Gordon shared her mentor's passion for crime fighting, but not his obsession with it, which left her with a life to live when she retired from that specific line of crime fighting. And it's kind of nice to see the heroine settle down and live a somewhat happy life with her husband. Batman the Animated Series is so ripe with tragedy that it's nice to see the occasional happy ending, especially when it's well-deserved. Despite this continuity giving us Dick Grayson, Tim Drake, and Barbara Gordon, it still manages to make an argument for Terry being Bruce Wayne's greatest protege. What I really appreciate about this series is that while the episodes work fair enough on their own, the show has a steady narrative, and you can actually see Terry progressing into the titular role episode by episode. Every story challenges this Batman and challenges him differently, with him learning a lesson by the end of each episode, becoming a better fighter, a better detective, a better Batman, and in some cases, a better person. And that's an improvement from the original series. In those first two Batman shows, episodes felt like they shared a continuity, sure, but they felt like completely separate adventures that happened to take place in the same canon. Whereas here, you feel like you're watching something in real time. Batman Beyond is equal parts a follow-up to the first two shows, and its own unique premise. Beyond puts the past of its predecessor on full display, constantly showcasing elements from the first series and continuing to complete story arcs. And sad to say, most of these stories don't exactly have happy endings. In the new Batman adventures, we learn that Mr. Freeze's condition has advanced, ultimately reducing him to a head in a jar. In Batman Beyond, he makes his return, being used as a guinea pig for Derek Powers. Freeze is given a brand new body and is cured of his ailment, no longer needing to be kept at Arctic temperatures. He has a new lease on life and is desperate to prove himself cured, not only of his affliction, but of his old villainous ways. Despite this, the public isn't ready to accept his change, especially those who have been affected by his antics. He offers up his sincerest apologies, but those words aren't met with gratitude, and understandably so. His speeches are even silent on normally super sound bat ears, at least one set of them. Whereas Terry supports his redemption arc, Bruce isn't as quick to believe that Freeze has changed. Ultimately, the operation that gave him a new lease on life doesn't fully take, and eventually he has to be put back into his cold-conditioned suit. And upon his reunion with his icy armor, he attempts to take revenge on Derek Powers. He's ultimately thwarted by the Batman of the future, yet in spite of this, in Freeze's final moments, he saves the new Batman and sacrifices himself, refusing help as he no longer has the will to live.
Yes.
It would move me to tears if I still had tears to shed.
When the drug Venom hits the streets, it turns its users into roid-raged rogues, and it's suspected that Batman's old foe Bane has made his return. Except when Bane is revealed, it's clear that he's in no shape to scheme. He's a broken down, slender, frail old man, still living but not entirely conscious, due to years of Venom abuse. The big brute isn't in control. Instead, it's his caretaker who's taking advantage of him, using his formula and panhandling it to high school students. In the end, the drug takes its toll and he winds up suffering the same fate as the man he once watched over, becoming yet another victim of Venom. This episode pulled no punches either, handling its mature subject matter in about as on the nose as you could in a show that's made for a much younger demographic, depicting drug use, addiction, and even withdrawals in a relatively realistic way. While the Joker is noticeably absent, his legacy lives on in the worst way imaginable. A gang is formed in his honor, utilizing his tricks, traps, tactics, aesthetic, and attitude. Without making so much as one appearance in the actual show, his presence is still largely felt, somehow managing to be all over this without ever actually being in it. The series also makes it a point to tell you that Commissioner Gordon has passed on. But much like Terry taking over the mantle from Bruce, Barbara has taken over the mantle from her father, becoming the second Commissioner Gordon, working alongside the second Batman. Well, maybe working alongside isn't the best way to describe their relationship. I mean, the two do become reluctant allies along the way, but it definitely doesn't start off that way. And while Barbara doesn't hate the new Batman or resent the old one, she doesn't take kindly to them interfering in police business, only working side by side with a modern-day dynamic duo when absolutely necessary. Speaking of sides, we're not given a whole lot of information about Bruce's other sidekicks. As a matter of fact, they're barely ever mentioned, save for a passing reference here and there. In spite of that, there are plenty of other callbacks. Sometimes this show will offer up a new story using an old story beat, but it doesn't feel cheap when it's done, it feels charming. These moments feel less forced and more full circle, like history repeating itself in a new setting. Terry falls for a femme fatale on the opposite side of the law, the new number 10 in the new Royal Flush Gang, which is a callback that is actually a call forward that becomes a callback. You see, because this was made first chronologically speaking, even though numerically it takes place further down the timeline. Meaning that technically speaking this was the first Royal Flush Gang, except this universe has future installments that took place before this, in which we see different Royal Flush Gangs, so. Which is not the point of what I was saying, so never mind. Good guy falls for the bad girl. And while Bruce voices his disapproval, Terry doesn't care to listen as he's far too love-struck, thinking he knows better even when Bruce knows that that's not the case. Eventually, this could-be couple is torn apart when they're forced to part ways, with the episode ending with Bruce relating to Terry, mentioning his own relationship with the rogue.
Let me tell you about a woman named Selena Kyle.
There are a couple of characters like this, characters who feel like allusions or soft adaptations of previous antagonists. Obviously, number 10 feels lightly inspired by Batman's feline foe. And in that same sense, I think you could also make a claim that Chiare is cut from the same cloth as Talia. What with being a deadly female assassin tied into some secret society of assassins. It's kinda on the nose. Just take away the romance between the villainess and the titular hero, and add in facial disfigurement, and there you go. The character Ink is a metahuman who can shift her body to become a black ink-like liquid. She shapeshifts, and at times can even take on the appearance of those she chooses, her only weakness being water. So, not entirely unlike Clayface. Now, Spellbinder is an interesting case, as the character's already a character from the comics, making his debut during the Silver Age of Batman. He was a villain with the ability to create optical illusions through hypnosis. And while this was a pre-existing part, it doesn't change the fact that he was essentially used as a surrogate for Scarecrow. Although, I would say acting as an answer to Mysterio would probably be a better way of describing him. On this show specifically, he's New Age Scarecrow. He's presented in a similarly strange and eerie manner, just as the good bad doctor was. Sure, the outfit isn't nearly as horrifying, but he still invokes the same creepy nature that Jonathan Crane did, with both men under masks being psychologists of some sort. But the true standout in this new Batman's Rogues Gallery is this season's big bad, Blight. Now on the surface, Blight is touted as being an original character, and while that may be true, it's clear that he was created from the ribs of already established characters. Visually, the villain is identical to another Batman enemy, Dr. Phosphorus, who is another antagonist that radiated radioactivity. Though in terms of background and personality, Blight seems to be a little bit closer to this series' Lex Luthor. He's a corrupt corporate character, a heel CEO utilizing tech to terrorize. He's also pretty much the catalyst for all the chaos that follows in the city, as most of the season's other heroes and villains can be traced directly back to him, even if that's a paper trail he's burning. He put the hit out on Terry's father that led to him becoming Batman. He hired the vast majority of these episodic enemies as part-time assassins and partners in crime. At the very least, he seems to play some small part in each of their stories. He is a man who is so foul, so horrible that he has no fans, only foes. Even his own family turns on him for a profit, with his son sending Batman his way, and not doing so for the greater good, doing so for his own greater good. In most stories, a character who is betrayed by a loved one would come across as sympathetic, but Blight is so blatantly bad that it's hard to feel anything toward him. The whole season really builds him up to a point that by the end of it, I don't think we've scratched the surface of what this man can do with his powers, or what this man is willing to do with his powers. There doesn't seem to be a limit to what lows this villain will sink to, or what kind of damage he'll inflict. My biggest complaint for Batman Beyond has always been that its Rogues Gallery couldn't compete with the classic, which I still stand by, though I think that's a little bit of an unfair comparison. Batman has the greatest Rogues Gallery in all comic character history, so asking it to be replicated with such ease is a Herculean task to say the very least. And looking back, most of them hold up relatively well, but Blight by far has to be the most impressive. And I could even see him working as a villain for OG Batman. When Batman Beyond wasn't recreating characters and modernizing moments from their own lore, they were trying their hand at others, recreating and parodying the Fantastic Four with the Terrific Trio. 3 scientists who are transformed following a tragic accident that grants the group powers they never asked for, giving them a gift that at times can also feel like a curse. I think in addition to being the most obvious spoof, it's also supposed to be a take on the Terrible Trio, but that honestly could just be me looking too far into something that's not there. What's unique about all of these new additions is that while they're taking notes from the past, they're still setting things up in the future. These don't feel like cheap copycat clones of original characters, they feel like the next evolution of established threats. Most of these characters are only vague representations of the old villains visually. They're characters that are taking the place of characters no longer present, but I wouldn't say that they go full ripoff. They have their own unique and distinct identities that separate them from what it is they're related to. They may share some of the same blueprint, but the foundations are completely different. Even if the personas are alike, the person underneath it all is what makes things different. Like I said before, Batman Beyond was the same, but different. I think that's the greatest way of describing this series. It's what you're familiar with, presented in a way that you're unfamiliar with. The show wound up not only being a worthy successor to the animated series, but being pretty great in its own right, all things considered. And that's just season 1. So if you like this video and you'd be interested in seeing me go through the rest of the series, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"What next, Batman?"
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.